Good morning and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for July 24th. My name is Tim McGonigal. I'm the chair of the Committee of the Whole and I welcome you to today's proceedings. First of all, I would like to recognize with gratitude that we are on the ancestral lands of the Quw'utsun, Malahat, Subasit, Halalt, Penelakut, Snemanis, Layaxin, Pakwachin, Dididot, and Pachidot nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. Also welcome alternate Director Tatham and alternate Director Champ to today's meetings. And just recognizing that today is International Self-Care Day, so make sure you take care of yourself today. And it's Cousins Day, so reach out to your cousins and tell them how much you like them. With that, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you. Moving on.
Thank you. Number 2, that the minutes of the Committee of Whole meeting of July 10th, 2024 be adopted.
I have a mover and a seconder. Any errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We move to public input period.
Don't see any public. So we will move on. I'm sorry. The gallery is full, but not with public, just so you're aware. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We have delegations. Callie Melachenko, Ministry of Water, Land, Resource Stewardship, Water Authorizations Approval Process, online.
Good morning, Ms. Melachenko. Is that a correct pronunciation?
Melnichenko.
I was close.
Yeah, it's long.
Thank you.
So you'd like me to go ahead?
Please.
Okay, and I also have Arlette Malcolm here with me from the same ministry, because my scope is fairly limited, specific to kind of water authorizations in the West Coast region, and she's more focused on land use, water use planning in the region, so she's available for discussion and to answer questions as well. Should I share my screen for the presentation?
If you could, please.
Sure. Let's make technology work. Okay, you're seeing that?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
And is it the actual presentation, or are you seeing the like notes and things too?
No, we're just seeing the slides, so if you...
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, so yeah, I was asked to attend this meeting. I think some questions were coming up from directors, so I'm here to present from on water authorizations under the Water Sustainability Act. So I'm Callie Melnichenko. I'm the Water Resources Manager for the West Coast region, so covering Vancouver Island, Central Coast, and Haida Gwaii, with the Ministry of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship. So I have a pretty brief presentation, but if there's time, we can have discussion and questions after as well. So, sorry, my screens are doing something funny. Can you tell me what slide you're seeing now?
We're seeing the Water Sustainability Act authorizations.
Okay. So now you see outline?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so just the outline of my presentation, I'll cover some of the core concepts of the Water Sustainability Act, and then the key considerations when making water licensing decisions, and then we can have some time for questions, hopefully. So, as you're probably aware, surface water and groundwater are vested in the provincial crown, and water use of groundwater and surface water is regulated under the Water Sustainability Act. An authorization is required for most uses, with some exceptions, such as water for firefighting, domestic groundwater use, and unrecorded domestic surface water use. So when a water license is issued, it's issued appurtenant to land and not directly to the landowner. So whoever the owner of the land is the licensee. And if the land is sold, that license stays with the land and the new owner becomes the licensee. Another key concept is that no water right other than domestic groundwater can be acquired by prescription, which means that even if somebody has been using water without an authorization for many years, if they were to apply to become authorized, doesn't guarantee that they would be issued a license. And then another key point is that water licenses are issued for specific water use purposes, and those purposes are all defined under the Water Sustainability Act. And the water must be used for that purpose that's listed in their water license. And if somebody were to need to use water for a purpose not in their water license, they would need to apply to amend their water license to authorize that particular use. So licenses are very specific to the volume and purpose of use that they're issued, as well as the source and the point of diversion that they're issued for. Excuse me. So licensed and domestic groundwater rights or licenses are based on prior appropriation, which is commonly known as first in time, first in right. So sometimes in times of scarcity, water rights may be curtailed kind of based on the order that licenses were issued or the priority dates of water licenses. Water licensees are also required to make beneficial use of water as prescribed in their water license. Otherwise, their license may be subject to cancellation in full or in part. And beneficial use means using water as efficiently as practicable in accordance with applicable regulations as authorized by their license. So that's also a consideration that we'll get into on the next slides as well. So in terms of water licensing considerations, these are kind of the 5 key ones, but there can be others, but I'll go through each one on individual slides. So when somebody applies for a water license, one of the key considerations that I was just mentioning is beneficial use. So beneficial use, in terms of a consideration when somebody's applied, it's really important because we need to understand that the applicant actually has the potential to use the water in the way that they're proposing. So that's why we send referrals to local governments and other agencies, and kind of reasons why we send referrals to, like yourselves, the CVRD. We're trying to confirm things like, is the zoning correct? Is this use or kind of potentially proposed development actually going to take place? And we're looking for confirmation of that, or kind of the probability that that will actually occur. We also want to confirm that the volume applied for is reasonable and will be used efficiently. We license what's actually going to be used and not what could potentially be used in future. There's an exception there for waterworks or water supply from like municipal water supplier from a water service provider. So then beneficial use is usually looked at based on kind of per capita or per household water use, with some potential, like kind of the potential for build out in the area, kind of usually ranging between 10 and 25 years, depending on the investment being made there. And then water availability is, of course, a very important consideration. So we need to determine, one, if there's sufficient water available to meet the proposed demand, as well as existing demands and environmental flow needs. So water availability is typically evaluated using a water budget approach at an appropriate scale, supported by data from provincial observation wells, stream flow gauges, meteorological stations, as well as site-specific studies that may have been done by the province or been done by the applicant in support of their application. And we have many subject matter experts internally to the province that review and validate the data that we're using, as well as the reports that are received in support of application. And then the WSA also requires that we consider impacts to other users. So these impacts could occur due to insufficient water availability or kind of well-to-well or well-to-stream interactions at a more localized scale. So if it's determined through the review of a water license application that impacts to another licensee or authorized water user to to a riparian right holder or physical impacts to land may occur, those rights holders must be notified, and that's stipulated in the Water Sustainability Act. So those rights holders would receive a notification either from the applicant or from the decision maker, and they would have an opportunity to object to that application. And that process is used to understand what those impacts, gain a better understanding of what those impacts may be. And then there would be steps taken to try to avoid or mitigate those impacts. If avoidance or mitigation isn't possible, then it's unlikely that that authorization would be granted. And then of course, there's environmental impacts. So environmental impacts can be characterized both or environmental flow needs, so impacts from diverting water from the source, as well as terrestrial and aquatic impacts that may be caused from kind of the construction of works that would be used for the diversion of water. The WSA requires the decision maker to consider environmental flow needs, and it also gives the authority to ask for reports and mitigation measures in relation to environmental flow needs. And if an authorization will negatively impact environmental flow needs and it can't be mitigated or avoided in some way, then that application may be refused. And then finally, of course, the province has a duty to consult with First Nations whose interests may be impacted by the granting of an application. So staff work directly with First Nations whose territories overlap with the application to seek consensus on decisions. And if impacts to Indigenous interests can't be avoided, mitigated, or accommodated, then the authorization should not be issued. And that is all that I have. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Great. I'll write down looking for hands. And prior to doing that, just to let you know that the YouTube channel is now streaming for those who care. Our YouTube channel is streaming now. I have Director Wilson. Do I have Director Nicholson next? So we'll go to Director Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that presentation. This is one of the things that's becoming more and more important nowadays. One of the things that I keep a very close eye on are the observation wells that we have around my particular area, and there is a couple of them that are fitted with remote monitoring, so the data is constantly transmitted to the province and displayed on your website there. One of the things that I would like to see if there are plans to increase the number of remotely operated wells so that they are transmitting continuous data. And if not, then could we arrange that those monitoring wells or observation wells which collect data but do not transmit them, perhaps that data could be collected on a more regular basis and displayed on the website? Is there any plans for expanding those services?
Yes, we are actively working to fit any observation wells that are suitable for telemetry, so that transmitted data that goes directly to the website. Some wells are in locations that don't have enough, it requires cell service to transmit that data. So some wells are in locations that don't have service, or sometimes there's just been so much vandalism that occurs at the site that we can't continue to replace that equipment. So we did have a bit of a lack of capacity for a while, but we have increased our capacity by a couple staff, one in Ministry of Environment and one on my team. So we are trying to increase the frequency of site visits. I think they're scheduled quarterly right now for the data downloads, but if there is an interest or kind of a concern in a particular area, you can always let us know and we may be able to go download that data at that time. But we are operating over 80 wells in the region, so kind of they have a schedule for going out and doing maintenance and downloading data for all of those wells.
Follow up, Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you for that. I understand that there is quite a lot there. I think in this particular case there, the perhaps I'm a little bit biased here, but one particular aquifer that I like to keep a very close eye on has a number of observation wells, which, thank you, by the way, the data has been downloaded recently. But if you could try and collect that data from those which are not remotely monitored or transmitting data a little bit more often, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Director Nicholson next.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly, for the presentation. And I just like to say I really appreciate the presentation, but I also really appreciate the work that you and your staff have done for the Cook Silo watershed. Yeah, it's been very important for us. A couple of questions on water licensing. One you won't be surprised at. In the Cook Silo, there were several people who were caught off guard with not having applied for a license, and there was a crackdown on that. I am wondering if there's been any consideration of a sort of a grace period for people who were not taking water licensing seriously enough on the groundwater front.
I think that's something that needs to be addressed at the political level, not that I'm aware of. Right now, it's the Water Sustainability Act that applies, and my role is to implement that act.
Thank you. And a follow-up question. We have often, we sometimes have zoning that has been sitting around for a while, and then the developer comes along and wants to develop. And things have changed since the zoning was put in place, perhaps. And so we are working really hard to make sure that development occurs in a place where there will be a complete community. And sometimes these developments are phased in. And I am wondering, is there an opportunity? I mean, I think that what happens quite often is that a water license is given for phase one without a guarantee for phase two. And we know that times are changing as far as water availability goes. And I also, as another part of this question is, do you feel that you have good coverage of monitoring wells throughout the region that you can make good decisions? Or is it that you need to give a license for a phase one and then maybe you'll get one for phase two once we have more ability to monitor? To me, that seems like a not a good way of development to occur. I think that we really need to get on top of not developing when we don't have secure water resources. So is there anything that you can comment on as far as authorizations go?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said in the presentation, usually, like for most water use purposes, we'll only license kind of what can be used at that time, and if expansion is being considered in future, a new water license application would be required for that additional volume. But for water supply, we typically would consider build out anywhere from 10 to 25 years out. So if the plans are understood for kind of the full build out, that can certainly be applied for. There's certainly areas where water is very scarce and there's a lot of uncertainty about kind of the ability over the long term, particularly with climate change, for the full development to be able to be supported by water in the area. And that could be a case where it might be more appropriate to phase it in, understanding that that may not then meet kind of the intent of the development. But there may also be a need to explore various water supply options for a larger development as well. I think it's fairly site specific or case specific. Observation wells are they're a point in one location, right? So they're not representing an entire aquifer. We usually try to put them in locations where it's kind of more ambient or background water levels, not reflective of what's happening kind of in a localized area. We try to not have them be impacted by pumping of nearby wells. So we usually, for larger scale uses, we usually require quite a bit of testing and evaluation of the water availability before making a decision on the license application. But I think in some of the areas, particularly in the southern part of the CBRD, are becoming very water scarce, and it can be challenging to make a decision that water will be available for kind of a large scale development over the long term, given the scarcity that we've seen. So sometimes it requires ongoing data collection to support that.
Thank you.
That concludes. I'll come back to you, Director Morrison next.
Thank you, Kelly, for the presentation and great information. I want to venture more into the licensing area, and I feel like being a little cheeky, but I won't, because you'd mentioned that the statutory decision maker, and just given the anecdotal evidence and the stories that we're having from the development community, we're clearly in a housing crisis, and one of the things that we're hearing is that not only is the time required to have a license issued, but even the making of an application for a water license is becoming more difficult. At least this is what we're hearing from the development community. So when we have applications that may involve rezoning and various permitting, and we also have the requirements that need to be fulfilled for a water license to service development, is there anything in the works that is going to alleviate this backlog, that is going to give the development community some hope that they can make application, that they have a reasonable chance if all of the conditions that you mentioned in your presentation, if they're met, that there can be a relatively quick issuance of a permit so that the development can actually start and that people can actually start to build homes and help to alleviate the housing crisis?
Yeah, so one of the top priorities for this government is housing, and all housing applications are put to the top of our queue. So there is a pretty limited, short wait time to get those applications assigned to a water officer for review. I'd say the majority of the development occurring are in highly developed areas already where water scarcity exists. And knowing that, like, building houses for people, we need quite a bit of certainty that that water supply will continue to be available. We do have a lot of challenges with having very, very poor quality being provided along with an application coming from consultants to support those applications. So often there's a lot of back and forth required and a lot of internal review required as well to get the information that's actually needed to make a decision on that application. And there is also initiatives underway. You mentioned the backlog or caseload to reduce and eventually eliminate that backlog as well.
A follow-up?
Well, thank you for that, Kelly, and I appreciate the issues around areas of scarcity and the likes, but there are areas within our region that that's not a particular issue. I guess where I would go next is the information readily available and clearly understood in the community so that when people are making application, we have exactly the same issue with our staff getting incomplete and inferior applications coming in the door. And of course, that just adds time to the processing. But is there something that we can do to help to ensure that the messaging is out there that, apply early, apply often, make sure your applications are complete? Is there somewhere you can direct us so that we can ensure that when the development community is making application that they are doing it in the most expeditious fashion possible?
Yeah, I mean, they're always welcome to reach out to us and ask ahead of time and seek some advice on the information that may be required. There's also, for groundwater, there's a technical assessment guidance document that very clearly lays out the information requirements. There is quite a bit of information online about the application process, and I'm not as familiar with this, but there is the housing task force now too that I think are supporting applicants for housing developments that are helping them kind of identify all of the different applications that would be required from all the different agencies, and I think helping them kind of get those applications in place and understand the information requirements for those. I'm not involved with that, but I think the province has established that team.
First-time speaker, Director Martman. Any other first-time speakers before I go? Okay, Director Segal. Director Martman, please.
Thank you for the presentation, and more, I think along the lines of other questions, with Bill 44 and the, in particularly rural areas with detached suites, my understanding is that there's a need for having a water license to have that detached suite in place. Is there any thought, or is the ability there to license domestic water at this point?
So a detached suite that is just domestic water use. So somebody can have a house on their own property for themselves and also have a rental, and that would be considered domestic as well. We do license surface water for domestic use, but not groundwater. There is regulation making authority under the Water Sustainability Act that could require water licensing for domestic groundwater in certain areas, but there hasn't been any movement to doing that at this point. I'm not sure if there's the distinction you need made is between the Water Sustainability Act and the definition of domestic versus the health authority, which considers, I think, more than one. If there's more than one house connected to a well, then it's a water supply system, and then they fall under the health requirements.
That concludes. Okay, Director Segal, please.
Thank you so much. My question is about the beneficial use of water and that conservation efficiency measures must be in place. I'm wondering if there's any requirements for license holders or water purveyors to follow seasonal drought water restrictions.
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely a conversation that's happening internally. Arlette, I don't know if you've got anything there or if you've been involved there. It's something that's happening with the policy teams for sure. There's a lot of, provincially, there's been a lot more kind of organization around drought response this year and messaging, and I think that will continue to increase. There aren't any requirements for kind of licensees to follow water use restrictions, although there's a lot of messaging and encouragement for voluntary reductions of water use. And I think that's something that will be talked about more kind of internally to try to figure out if there is a way to more strongly encourage or require kind of water use reduction without kind of going to the full curtailment of water use.
Thank you.
So second time around, Director Nicholson, please.
Thank you. I think this is a question probably more for Arlette. We don't have a regional growth strategy, and given concerns about water scarcity, it seems to me that hopefully we're moving towards doing a regional growth strategy. So I guess my question is really about what kind of support can the province provide us on doing a water-based regional growth strategy, because I think that's one of the key issues that we would need to address.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. I think it's a good question to ask, like at this stage as we're in this kind of midstream approach with Coquille Island Water Sustainability Plan. And I think that probably is the type of tool you might be thinking about in that sense of connecting regional growth with provincial tools under the Water Sustainability Act that might provide some sort of a structure and approach to kind of talking about how we can actually do this in a more integrated way. I think that right now the WSP approach is probably the best fit we have for having this kind of a conversation. There is also the opportunity to look at water use objectives at a more watershed or regional scale. So I think there are tools in place. Maybe it's just a matter of having a conversation to really understand how those tools apply, kind of what the goals are at the regional district level, and then figuring out what sort of a partnership model is possible going forward. We do have examples across the province of different levels of plans that are being undertaken right now that are following the tools of the WSA. But what I think what we can see is that there's an opportunity to explore different models across a province depending on the need and the critical issues that are at hand in a particular region. So I think there's space to have that conversation.
Thank you.
Director Staples.
Thank you, and I'm not sure if this is the right time to, or place to ask this question, but I'll ask it anyways. One of the things that I think about a lot with all the building that we're doing and with facing the housing crisis, and is are we looking at like working together on different levels of and across different sectors in the province, and is it looking at how we use water domestically? Because we're building all of these buildings, you know, in a way that we still have a high water use. And so is there anything that actually looks at how we could do away with some of the ways that we actually use water and wastewater and build new ways of dealing with waste, of dealing with gray water systems, all of those types of things, because I feel like we're sort of at least a decade or two behind other places working on these things, and are those conversations happening together would be one question. And sorry that was so long.
Arlette, do you have anything there? No.
So the question is, I'm not sure what the question was. Sorry, could you?
Well, just in like, so we're doing all this building, right? And are we looking at water in a way that if we're building new houses, why are we still using flushing toilets? That's one example. Like, are we actually looking at how we can do away with types of water use that that we've had for decades, that there are now new ways of dealing with that rather than using fresh water? So is everyone talking to each other, looking at this?
Okay, so I think that, part of it is how across different levels of government, we're actually engaging on dialogue on conservation, like water conservation, and looking at the reality of climate change and how we can all contribute to that at different levels. So right now, the province is taking a bit more of a hands-on approach with drought response and preparation. And I think that would be a good space to start having those conversations about sharing information and ideas and tools that would be useful and applicable at a municipal or regional district level in terms of water conservation measures. So I think that is something that, there are different accountabilities, but I think in terms of sharing knowledge and tools, there's definitely space to improve upon that. But at a provincial level, in terms of kind of providing direction or specific guidance on things that you could be doing at the household or specific water user level, that doesn't necessarily exist, but I think it's definitely a space where we could probably be collaborating better.
Yeah, and maybe to add, I think a place where we have started to have that conversation in a fairly informal way is in the Mill Bay area. I've been meeting with staff from the CBRD, member of the Mill Bay Waterworks District and Malahat Nation, to kind of really understand our jurisdictions and kind of what each of our jurisdictions has the authority to do in terms of encouraging or requiring water conservation and trying to kind of leverage those as best we can. I don't think we've found solutions, but it has been really helpful in understanding kind of the tools that may be available. So I do think that there is probably opportunity to work with the different levels of government to kind of improve on that, because I agree that there does need to be kind of more initiatives underway to reduce the overall water volumes that are being used in households.
Thank you.
And Director Wilson to close, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for this presentation. It's interesting that Director Nicholson and one of the has brought up pretty much the same sort of thing here with regional growth, and one of the words that you used there was jurisdictions, and that's where a lot of the problems are coming in, because there seems to be, well, it's not me, it's them, it's not them, it's somebody else, and we need to have more of this cooperation going on. For instance, the mapping of aquifers. There is some mapping going on. But are we working with our local government departments? I know for a fact that our environmental department was closely involved with that. Can you tell me if there's a lot more cooperation planned, or what are we doing about working together on this? It is a common problem. It's not a singular problem by any means. So is there anything being done that you can amplify on what you've already said about the cooperation between the various jurisdictions and levels of government?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Like one of the initiatives that we're trying to advance right now, and probably we'll see more discussion on this heading into next year, is like looking at setting up drought advisory tables and really as a forum to have that sort of an early season conversation and maybe an ongoing conversation about how different jurisdictions can work together in the space of climate change and preparing for drought and responding to drought. So maybe more at a strategic level to start that conversation to figure out where those gaps existing, like as you've mentioned today, like where those opportunities where we're not really talking across different groups, where we could be doing that more effectively, and starting that dialogue early, and then figuring out where we can start to share learnings, and then also maybe drive things to a more technical level at an operational level in terms of taking action. So definitely an opportunity there that we're at a provincial level, like within my ministry and my division in land use planning and cumulative effects, that we're definitely open to supporting. So welcome a further conversation on that.
Yeah, great, thank you. And a very quick follow-up, please, Mr. Chair.
Certainly.
One of the things that's happened over the last few weeks that has become more apparent with the water licensing applications that are going on is that it seems that applicants are being given tacit permission to carry on with their water usage and while their applications are in the queue. And this could be the start of a big problem if in the future their applications are refused. What happens if they're told to carry on and then their applications are refused? And let's assume they've put in some infrastructure, etc. It's a very strange thing to say, yeah, carry on while we process your application. Have you got any comment on that particular aspect?
I have to assume you're talking about existing use groundwater use applications and not.
That's right, yeah, I am.
Applications. So the law, the WSA states that is within the law itself. That says if you submitted an existing use groundwater or transition groundwater application before the deadline of March 1st, 2022, you have the right to continue to divert and use water as you did previously until a decision is made on that application. But for any other water license application, it is illegal to use water until a license is issued. And the intent of the existing use is to bring people into the licensing regime. The intent is not to refuse those applications, but it is still a statutory decision that has to be made.
Well, thank you very much. Very informative. Thank you, Ms. Malcolm, Ms. Melnichenko, for your presentation and answering our questions today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll just pause here for 1 second. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We have no correspondence or information items. We move to 7, reports. Report from the Facilities and Transit Division, proposed 3-year transit expansion plan, 2025-26, 2027 to 2028.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and directors. Just quickly to start out, I'm accompanied by 2 key individuals here, Seth Wright, Senior Manager of Government Relations with BC Transit on the far left, and Rochelle Rondeau is our Transit Analyst with the CVRD. Both of these have been involved in our expansion plans for the last 4 or 5 years. So if I'm not able to answer a question particularly, they can help me out here. I know the report is fairly lengthy and there's a lot of detail and data in there, and the recommended different types of service types that we have, the dollar amounts and the corresponding years, and there's lots of tables, but hopefully you're able to track through most of it from year 1 to year 3. First item to note is even though BC Transit does ask for a 3-year plan, the CVRD is only committed to the first year expansions in terms of our financial responsibility. And each year we bring back our request to each year so that we update the calendar as we go. So we're really only talking about 25-26 provincial year. And of course, that's conditional on the provincial government giving us their share of the funding, which, as we all know, unfortunately has been quite extremely limited over the past couple of years, but fingers crossed, maybe our next ask will be a little bit more successful. The second and third years with each one of these services the initiatives are really placeholders, and again, those items will be further reviewed as we move forward, and again, we'll seek your approval on those each year. The 3-year expansion plan, where did it come from again? As the report says, it's really a summary of the endorsed plans that the board has already approved, and there's 3 in particular. One is the Transit Future Action Plan, one was the South Cowichan Local Area Plan, and the last one is the 1-year review of our NCX service to Nanaimo. And since we're only successful in receiving provincial funding on 2 expansions, which was custom service and the NCX Friday and Saturday evening, for the current year, we've had a lot of discussion with consultation with BC Transit, and they encouraged us and recommended that we look to amalgamate our ask of expansion items. So in particularly the South Cowichan, the improvements there were on a 2-phase cycle, and we're now recommending that we put it in one. So in the report, you're going to see that items that were identified in years 2 and 3, we moved them up to 1 year to get within a quicker cycle. But even doing this, some of the conventional service items, they're still delayed. There's long bus delivery times that we're still advised by BC Transit. So that has limited our commencements in 2025. The bulk of the year 1 improvements, which is about 4,300 hours, cannot start until the first quarter of 2026. And that is, even if it's approved, that's just because of the lengthy time to order the buses. With regard to the interregional service, in an effort to build on our successful Saturday service that we do both to Victoria and to the RDN, we're recommending to expand our service in the first year to also include Sunday service on both those services we offer. About 1,000 hours for the NCX, that'll give about 7 round trips, and about 650 hours for the CVX, and that'll give us 3 return trips. And in years 2 and 3, again, with regard to the regional services, there's placeholders of 900 hours. Again, those are items that we will look further into to get specific hours, but those are to add an additional midday trip Monday to Friday on the CVX. You might remember 6 or 8 months ago, we modified the schedule to move one of our really early morning trips to a little later in the morning, and it has become one of our most successful trips. So we know that we're getting a lot of inquiries about, can we run more trips during the day to Victoria, not just early in the morning coming back. So that's what the intent there would be. On the custom service side, we have 1,400 hours that will introduce Sunday service, and that's to extend evening service as well as service our peak service times. That has already been approved. It's in the current plan. It was supposed to start in September, but due to bus delivery times, it won't start until January of 2025. So it's actually not even shown in the 3-year cycle because it's already approved and in the works. And again, the plan has placeholders for 1,000 hours in both years 2 and 3. We think whenever we can get more additional hours from the province to deal with the individuals that have mobility issues, it's really beneficial for us. And it's also a fairly cost-effective way as the province funds more money towards Handy-Dart or custom service. So financially, the tables that's provided in BC Transit's Memorandum of Understanding letter, staff have reorganized it a bit, and we've tried to show the cost implications more relevant to our CVRD calendar year. So that's kind of why you're going to see a slightly different, the dollars are still there, but they're just changed to modify more particular to our budget years. And I know if you look at the total over the 4 years, the cost can seem fairly large, but please remember that we have not had any conventional service expansion since 2018, and that was only 1,500 hours. For the current 2024 year that we're in right now, the current budget includes about $112,000, which was requested for partial year expansions. But we've only got $9,000 for the NCX Friday and Saturday evening service that's going to happen in 2024. So the savings of that will be not required from the operating reserve because that's where the funding was to come from. So for next year, we've got 3 items to consider and include, and again, these are listed, but I'll just quickly go through them. The custom service that was approved to start in September, it's now in 2025. That requires a full year of $52,000. That amount is not shown in your table because the tables are actually there to show you this is the cost of any new expansions that we would seek to get approval on. The conventional service has about $16,500 for Route 7, which is a Saturday service, as well as the NCX Sunday service. And then again, we would need to add a full year of the NCX service for Friday and Saturday evenings, which is about $27,000. The commuter, there's a $26,500 adjustment or increase, and that would be for our new Sunday service if you approved that initiative. So the total for 2025 is, as the table shows, it'd be $43,065 is the new service. That's what we're recommending to you today. Plus there'd be about $79,500 for the custom and the NCX service that's already approved, but it'll be a full year. And staff, again, are going to recommend when we go to put our budgets forward in a month or so that we fund these out of the operating reserves. And the reason for that mainly is because these are not guaranteed services. We put the ask into the province, and so we generally don't find out until the end of February, sometimes early March, as to what our success situation is in that. So again, we wouldn't recommend that we put new services on the requisition. And then lastly, for years 2 and 3, they're showing the tables. Remember, these are not guarantees. These are placeholders. We'll bring them back to you each year as we move forward with the plans. That's my quick overview just of the staff report. If anybody has any questions, be happy to try and help them.
Thank you very much. It was a very wholesome report. Director Douglas?
Mr. Chair, I actually had a question for Mr. Wright from BC Transit. Would it be appropriate to ask that now?
He's stepping to the podium, so most certainly.
Certainly. Yeah, Mr. Wright, my question for you, and I understand you do have a background in land use planning. I just wondered if you could speak a bit to the relationship between land use planning and transit planning, and how our settlement patterns across the Cowichan region have affected the recent provincial decisions not to provide us with that funding for expanding transit. And also if you could speak to how, you know, a stronger focus on region-wide land use planning could put us in a better position in future years to secure that provincial funding. As one of my colleagues mentioned, we are looking at a regional growth strategy, and I would be curious your thoughts on how that might put us in a better position to, again, secure that provincial funding to expand our public transit system.
Certainly, it's quite a robust question, and through the chair, respectfully, I'll do my best to answer it, and I'll welcome any follow-ups if there's parts I miss. From a high level, our transit planning staff, we have a planning department and we have a planning team. We have a brand new transit planner that just joined our team. I'm very excited to be working with him. Jacob Burnley, he comes from local government background and has many years experience. He's going to be stepping into the role to support Cowichan going forward. But all the plans that have been done to date in Cowichan start by looking at what is the land use density across the region, what's the population density at present. The Cowichan Valley is one of a large sort of sprawling rural regions. I, as a resident, both appreciate the rural nature and character of our region, but also it's a struggle to develop efficient transit service across the region to connect all these small and disparate communities which have relatively low density. We have some urban areas in Duncan and throughout the North Cowichan and in localized nodes through the South Cowichan as well, but and Town of Lake Cowichan obviously in Ladysmith, but this density does not create the context and environment that's ideal for high ridership transit. So we have a low ridership system across the region. As a result, one of the main factors and driving forces in our multiple account evaluation of where to prioritize expansion dollars, and I want to reiterate and emphasize that the province did step up to the table with an unprecedented level of expansion last year for expansions this year. So while Cowichan didn't benefit on the conventional transit side for the expansions you've been asking for a number of years, the province did step up to the table. And in the 2024 budget indicated interest in continuing to sustain growth in their budget expansion. So there's perhaps hope on the horizon in that regard. And we have looked at our multiple account evaluation process and identified in that process that we would like to add value to systems where expansion has been repeatedly requested without being able to deliver. So that has bumped it up, even though ridership in Cowichan is lower than many of our other systems. That will play a role in the multiple account evaluation for this next year's expansion. Looking forward, and I think the next part of the question is sort of like, how do we look at transit and growth in a holistic way so that they can support each other? I think that's a fabulous question, and a question that my colleagues in planning would be more than enthusiastic to work with your planning teams at your respective municipalities and here at the regional district to look forward on. Certainly, a lot of our planning work looks at existing patterns and not necessarily at future patterns. But in some municipalities in the province, and I would perhaps as a land use planning nerd, highlight Squamish as one community that's really stuck strongly to its OCP and said, we want to scale development across our municipality, and we want transit to align with it. And from day one, when we open a new subdivision, we want there to be transit service in that community. And that's very sort of cutting edge in the world of transit, and they've been a strong advocate for expansion as you have been at this table. And so perhaps that gives some context, but if there's follow-up, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, a number of us have new official community plans or we're close to having new official community plans, but there's some way we could get those in front of your team to make sure you have that information. And I mean, just kind of spitballing here, but as we have some of these big development applications come before our respective boards and councils, it would be good to get that transit lens on it and have that information as we're deciding how to proceed.
Great, thank you. Director Stone, next.
I'd like to move the recommendation, and if I have a seconder, I'll speak to it.
Moved and seconded, and
Thanks.
please.
Thanks again, Mr. Wakeham, and I feel like it's deja vu a little bit with minor modifications the last few years, but thankful for the work that you continue to do. Only comment based on the discussion is I think that how growth patterns and things, OCPs, regional growth strategies are all really important. It would take decade or more, or perhaps decades, to make such a meaningful change in the density of the region to really impact, I think, transportation planning. But it is noteworthy that the number of new OCPs and the depth to which both active and public transportation planning was included in those would be meaningful to the discussion about how we look at transit within the region. Even if it is just really focusing in on the denser areas and how we improve conventional service in those areas to then feed into the interregional work that's being done to help up ridership on those as well, because I know that we're putting a lot of other money into transportation conversations in communities through other organizations like ICE-T funding through Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure, and we have both nations and communities funding shuttles and things to help supplant BC Transit and other public transit service because of the lack of progress with the provincial government on improving conventional service in the more dense local areas. So hopefully that'll change in time, but happy to support the recommendation as it stands for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ishdash.
Thank you, Chair. Questions can be either for Mr. Wright or Mr. Wakeham. I see it's not in next year's. I like where we're going and seeing the investment into the NCX, but of course, speaking in my sphere of where I live and use transit, I'm hopeful that we are going to have some progress on that Ladysmith-Chemainus connections, especially in the light of Director Douglas spoke. We have 2 large BC housing projects in queue, hopefully within Chemainus, and 2 6-story apartments just received preliminary zoning amendments last week for Chemainus as well, on top of that. So the biggest thing we see in the community is the connectivity to get to Ladysmith. There's only 4 buses a day. They're very awkward. It takes 45 minutes to get from Chemainus to Ladysmith, which is a 10-minute drive. So that connection to the NCX, where are we at with looking at alternative stops? As I know it's difficult because of the way the Island Highway is, but it definitely is going to make an improvement for Saltaire Area G and Chemainus Area Regional District people. So where are we at on that connection? As I see, it says year 2 or 3. It did get bumped once already. I'm just curious on where we are in making that a better enhanced service.
Do you want to speak to that?
Sure.
Thanks.
I was recently in a meeting with the Ministry of Transportation staff, and I did raise the question about stops on the highway. Indeed, other local governments up and down Vancouver Island have questions like, where can we add a stop on the highway, and would the ministry entertain the possibility of additional stops? And so I raised the 70 NCX stop in Chemainus as an example of a stop that we'd like to be able to see a stop on the highway, so it doesn't have to deviate into town and can maintain its express status. I think there's another part, so that's a question that I'm trying to progress with the ministry, and I have no report at this time, but I will continue to pester that relationship. In terms of the connections between Chemainus and Ladysmith, I would say that there's a scheduling piece, as you've, I think, previously highlighted, on the 34 to the 70 connection. And so from a scheduling perspective, when we do another holistic reschedule, we'll look at, can we finesse that to make that connection work a little bit better, and be aware that people are coming from Chemainus to get up to Nanaimo. So I think that's a key piece of that. Obviously, every time you create a connection, it can take a few minutes, then have a cascading impact. So sometimes it's not achievable, but we can do our best to look at that piece. And then more, unfortunately, long-term or midterm, in the next few years, looking at the possibility of establishing a transit service in Saltaire, I understand, has been part of the conversation. So that might enable stronger connections between Chemainus and Ladysmith, either on the Route 34 or perhaps the Route 6.
Follow-up?
Great, thanks. Yeah, because my initial thought would be is that you wouldn't need to really, you could expand 34 service by cutting off the route to Ladysmith and add more trips, because you'd be connecting, say, Henry Road and the highway. So you could try to match, because we have 4 trips right now and there's 12 NCX stops throughout the day, and there's only 4 Chemainus possible connections for Crofton, Chemainus, or Saltaire to get to Ladysmith to hit the NCX. So we could probably cut the travel time down on the 34, connect to the NCX, and then that save time, resources, money, and infrastructure could be into more trips. And then the bigger investment is improving the NCX, which is, I think, going to have larger, greater impacts for so many CVRD areas throughout the region. So thanks for that feedback.
Okay, I have Director Morrison and then Director Nicholson.
Thank you, and I want to congratulate Seth on his very deft stick handling of that question about whether or not our funding denial was linked to a lack of an RGS, and well done. I just want to quickly ask if there is a possibility that your planning folks can either interact with staff or come and share with us some of that lens for growth. I know that, historically there's been relatively decent ridership coming from the west because of the socioeconomic relation to, the users and the ability for people to find affordable housing. Now, there's been a dramatic change in that as of late, but I think that people, if they have to locate in the places where they can put a roof over their head, transit is not a luxury, it's a requirement for them to be able to attend work. So I'd like to be able to get a better idea of what the planning folks at BCT are thinking around that provision of service to maybe that less dense area, but where people are moving and living and having to get to work and using the service.
If I could, I might, through the chair, just advertise to you, to your staff ultimately, that BC Transit has an email, developmentreferrals@bctransit.com, that you can encourage your staff to send development referrals for especially the major developments that you're seeing across the community. So I wouldn't worry too much about duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, but when you're seeing apartment buildings, BC housing projects and things, do send that our way, and our planning team will respond. And moreover, feel free to send an email to me, and I will be happy, especially if you want us to make a presentation. We'll pull in CVRD staff so they're in the loop, but we're happy to come to your respective council table if you'd like us to present and speak to the relationship between transit and development.
Great. Just being cognizant, we do have a motion on the floor. I'll move to Director Nicholson to close, please. And she has declined, so I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Do we anticipate, Mr. Wakeham, you seeing the 3-year plan to its finalization?
Are you knowing something I don't know? I'm not sure where the question came from, but.
No, it's all in jest. We thank you for the report.
Yeah, thanks. Okay.
And with that, I think it's time for about a 10-minute break so people can recharge their Shall we buffer? Welcome back. Moving on, Ms. Boyd, to the next item, please.
Thank you, Chair. We're on R2, report from Emergency Management Cowichan regarding 2025 Emergency Warming Center, projected cost and spatial analysis.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Just before we get started, a slight correction. The projected costs, because they include a discussion of lease and contract, have been moved to the later report for this afternoon. So I'll just see if I can. There we go. So as part of the board direction to find an alternate location to provide emergency warming services for 2025, we gathered a group of we call it the local project group, which was ourselves at the CVRD emergency program, North Cowichan, City of Duncan, Cowichan Tribes, as well as for the latter part of the discussion, Lookout Housing and Health Society. We contracted with City Spaces. It's a name that's probably familiar to the board. They've done quite a bit of work for us. And the project was basically to do a bit of a spatial analysis. So to look at the core area of CVRD, Duncan, and North Cowichan, and come up with a way using existing best practice from other jurisdictions, from literature, et cetera, to understand where a service like a warming center could go. There is no specific research done around warming centers. So the criteria that was used and agreed to by the local project group was that used for citing other kinds of services like shelters that's been used in other jurisdictions. So we've got a bit of a, oh. Share. Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Perfect. I just need to move my WebEx screen here. So the memorandum produced by the consultants is attached to this report, as well as this slide deck. This afternoon, we'll be able to go into a little bit of a live demonstration of the tool. And before we jump in, I think it's important to note that as a result of this project, we do now have a tool for that core area that will be a legacy. So as development hopefully transpires to support things like permanent and temporary shelters and other service discussions for unhoused people, this tool will be something that lasts beyond this project and can be used because it was developed using best practice, and they have left that tool with us. Why is this? So effectively, the scope that we put in front of the contractor was the requirement for a warming center to support vulnerable populations, particularly homeless in winter. We obviously had a lot of discussion around the past challenges with the siting at the CCC and some of the areas of friction and conflict that developed because of that siting. And then as we worked with the consultant, we went through a spatial siting exercise to identify suitable areas. And what we were looking for from the consultant was to identify areas or to provide us areas where we shouldn't go according to the criteria, so that we then had a negative map of areas that we could do some investigation in. Sorry, I'm struggling with the buttons on. So the defined area covered all three jurisdictions, sort of where we see our largest concentration of homelessness, or the four. That was City of Duncan, the area of North Cowichan, north of the City of Duncan, the CVRD, Area A, and Cowichan tribes. And we looked at as well things like the access to essential services like public transit or walking distance. And we can go to, I think, the first map here. So this was basically the study area, and you can see the jurisdictions are outlined there. City of Duncan obviously centered in the middle of the map, and then we have CVRD, Cowichan tribes, and North Cowichan. So the siting criteria, again, used existing wise practice and the stories that have been coming out of other jurisdictions that have gone through siting exercises similar to the one that we're talking about. We ended up with 12 spatial criteria to use as the basis for our analysis. The contractors brought those to us, and we looked at them and we gave them some weight. The idea also is not that the tool excludes any area, but gives us an understanding of the kinds of friction or use conflict that we might see in neighborhoods if a site was chosen that wasn't sort of in that ideal or open space. And then they left us with a number of maps, and I'll just kind of take you through those now. But this was the siting criteria that was used. So we did, throughout the process, consider proximity to services. Walkability was key, and sort of we looked at 5, 10, 15, and 20 minutes as sort of the reasonable extension of what people might be walking to reach this warming center in cold weather. We took some of our existing services for homeless people. And so like the Cowichan Valley Basket Society, recovery centers, the existing Warmland House and Outreach, the Village Project, schools, childcare centers, recreational facilities, and seniors homes and services. We also included some medical offices and things like that. And then we based on our analysis, most of the locations that you could pick within the study area are within 400 meters of a transit stop. So this is a heat map and our features of interest. So you can see in the legend there, the heat map, which is the yellows and oranges, gives us the concentration or overlap of existing services and features where the criteria tells us we maybe would want to really closely consider if we were going to put a warming center in those areas. And then you can see, obviously with local knowledge of the area, we can see that there's a significant amount of very residential area that's not heat mapped, but again, may not provide sort of the location or service potential that we're looking for an emergency warming center. The other thing that we looked at was sort of the buffering. What the criteria recommended was sort of 150 meters from these features of interest, so daycares, et cetera. So this map here just gives you an indication of sort of how densely covered the core area is when we start to look at sort of exclusionary criteria for siting a warming center. Just another sort of feature map. This is the 50, 75, and 100 meter point buffers. So we used both parcel buffers, that's from the outside of the lot, as well as from the feature of interest, so whether it's a daycare or a school itself, to give us, again, those areas where we would really want to strongly consider how we would manage if we wanted to site a warming center near those locations. This again, same distance buffers, but applied to the parcels. So we can see that the area of coverage becomes quite a bit more densely covered. And this was our walking distance to social services. So you can see, from that overlay map, this would be the area where beyond this, we would need to start looking at providing transportation services along with other things. To site a warming center outside that 20-minute walking buffer. And I'm sure that you can tell by looking at those maps, concentration of features with higher weights assigned. There's just a lot going on in terms of services, locations, schools, daycares, senior centers within the core area that means there's no real ideal location for a warming center popping up. And I should mention that to sort of cast our net as wide as possible, we did look at existing structures, commercial buildings, municipally owned properties. We looked at bare land. We looked at parkland, so really as much as we could, we wanted to understand that. So, and again, just drawing on the stories that have been told in other jurisdictions, making sure that we understand wherever we locate this service for next winter, that it being within walking distance to other services is both going to reduce the impact on the neighborhood, where we may be siting it, as well as ensure that those folks are able to move from that warm place overnight to an area where they can still find some warmth and shelter during the day. So that effectively is the summary of the analysis that was done. I'm happy to take any questions that we have on this portion.
Thank you very much. And before we go to questions or comments, if we could just be respectful of not identifying specific properties during this discussion, make your general comments or questions, I would appreciate that. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ryan. It's a tough job you've got to do there. And let me first of all say my thanks to you and the organisations for the work that they do to help the less fortunate that are out there. I know that you're looking at the siting. I'm not going to comment on that, but what I am going to comment on is the financial considerations. And I'm going to paraphrase some of the key phrases from the report there. One of them is activated only when weather criteria are met. The second one is not all required elements are eligible for reimbursement. And the 2024 costs of $170,000, which you are still working to determine how much of that expenditure will be recovered from the EMCR. And this is, I do have a question at the end of this, but Mr. Chair, the perception of an almost total lack of empathy or understanding of the problems that all local governments face during inclement weather conditions by the province is a source of constant amazement to me. What do we have to do to bring this province to the province as a matter of urgency and compassion? And that's what I'm trying to get at here. We can help these people, but we cannot do it on our own. We need help. And the only place we can get that help from the people who sit in an office and say, this criteria has to be met, that criteria has to be met, and have no idea, I'm sorry, of what's actually happening on the street here. And I feel very strongly that we need to change things big time. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there a question in there, Director Wilson? What do we have to do? I think the question is larger than this body at this point. Any other questions or comments? Director Abbott.
If I may, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. As you went through the siting mapping, and I apologize if it's in the report and I missed it, does it have to be a standalone warming center, or can it be contiguous to another facility so that when we need it, an existing social service space could open its place for 40 beds, let's say?
Yes, through the chair to the director. We, as the local project group, we really had a lot of conversations around this about sort of casting our net as widely as possible. And to Director Wilson's point, as an emergency response, this is the highest cost, lowest level of effectiveness that we can put into place to make sure that these folks have somewhere warm to go overnight. When we look at our neighbors to the north in Nanaimo, they had some reasonable success last year with extending the services offered at an existing temporary winter shelter. So temporary winter shelter, 24/7 capacity over the winter, sort of April to November. And then as part of that project, they were also able to add temporary spaces when the weather got down to those warning criteria. So that is a model that has been used, and I think in terms of the level of service it provides to people who really need it, significantly higher than an emergency response.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? I did have one, if I may. I recently recall an announcement by the province on perhaps some changes within the criteria. Is that correct?
I haven't heard anything directly on that.
Okay. We anticipate that perhaps coming down the pipe. Excellent. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. R3, report from the Environmental Services Division regarding investment in Agricultural Foundation Agricultural Water Infrastructure Program grant application.
Do we have a presentation on this? Oh, there we are. He's online. I was looking for you in the room. Are you just here for questions, or?
Yeah, through the chair, thank you. The resolution for you is just requesting some funding for an application that you'd previously given us direction to look at applying at. So just here to answer any questions.
Great. I see Director Stone moving
Just
it.
move them. Yeah, move the
Director
recommendation.
Morrison seconding. Director Wilson thirding. Director Segal fourthing. Any other people? Director Ishdash, you as well in support. Any questions or comments? Or am I seeing it? You're sixthing it? Well, that's inappropriate as a staff member, but we appreciate that enthusiasm. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. R4, report from the Legislative Services Division regarding the South Cowichan Community Issues Assessment. This is for information.
Welcome. Please press the microphone button. Thank you.
Good afternoon, morning. I'm before you today to present to you with the interim report relating to the South Cowichan Community Issues Assessment. This report is for information, and it's fairly self-explanatory. It allows us to do a bit of a check-in with you all and provide a summary of the work we've undertaken to date. As noted in the attachment, we are actively in phase 3 of our work plan and look forward to getting out in the community with some pop-up events. And I'm happy to hear any questions or comments that you may have.
Since this is information, is there any comments? Director Segal.
Thank you for the report. Just noticing that the Cobble Hill Fair isn't listed as one of the pop-up locations, but I know some directors and I have a booth that we'll be at. So if there's any materials we can we can put them out.
I would love if you would take some little cards for us. That would be amazing. It wasn't identified as an event just because it's a little bit closer to the end of our survey timing, but if I would happily give you some cards to take, that would be amazing, yeah.
Collaboration at its best. Director Stone, you're okay? Anyone else while I'm looking? Director Dickelson.
Thank you. Would you mind sending me the link to the survey and so forth? Because I'm concerned that people in Area B on the west side of the Coxsila are not going to be participating if I don't kind of go out and hound them.
I'd appreciate that. I'll send you a link for sure.
Anything further? Thank you very much. Ms. Boyd, moving on.
Thank you, Chair. R5, report from the Economic Development Division regarding Economic Development Cowichan Strategic Plan Project update for information.
And we're online with this one? Hello, Steve, you're online?
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm just called in. So am I good to go then?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay. So hello everybody. I'm just going to try to share my screen here. Can everybody see that?
Yes, sir. If we can make it full screen, that would help.
Good.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'll just take a few minutes to go through where we are in the planning process. And so we're about, past halfway. We're about two-thirds of the way through the project at this time. There's the analytical phase, or the analysis phase, occurred earlier on in the year. It culminated in a discussion paper that was submitted to EDC, and it's gone through several drafts. So that's our baseline report, if you will. And we've been going through the engagement process for the last 3 or 4 months. So we've done focus groups, surveys, interviews. We've interviewed most of the directors. And we have a planning workshop coming up in September. So that will be when we sort of enter the final phase in producing the strategic plan. So that'll be coming up again in September, and we'll be wrapped up by the end of the year. So what I'm going to talk about today is just where we are in the engagement process. So we've done the interviews, we've done the business survey, we've done the community survey, we've done a set of focus groups, we've talked to in the neighborhood of 450 people, all in all. And so there's been some really good outreach, some very good, interesting insights, and I'll just talk a bit about that in the following slides here. We still got some ongoing outreach with the youth and also First Nations. And so probably by the end of this project, we'll be well over the 500 mark in terms of outreach. So I'm just going to go over a couple of the sort of highlights, if you will, of the interviews. So these are just some of the key issues: regulatory, economic constraints, workforce, housing challenges, transportation and infrastructure development, education, skills development, collaboration, within the region, and also quite a bit of discussion around balance between environmental, economic, and sort of sustainability issues. So we heard quite a bit of that in the interviews. With the directors, I guess we talked about strengths, constraints, and what the EDC role should be in economic development. I think the strengths really came down to sort of natural assets of the region, and also the people assets of the region. The constraints were really more around infrastructure and, things like housing and industrial land and that sort of thing. Like, where is the economic activity going to go today? Where is it going to go tomorrow? And, we talked about things like population growth and the growing economy. So there's a lot of constraints, sort of on the built side, if you will. And the EDC role, there was discussion on, where could the EDC be most effective? And so quite a few topics or sort of issue areas came up, anything from infrastructure to housing, obviously diversifying the local economy, working with supply chains, things like a potential land bank. So there's quite a diversity of potential roles that EDC should, and we'll be getting into that when we get into the strategic plan. And so the focus groups, very similar sets of issues. So housing, workforce, regulatory, water management. I think in almost every focus group, we had water management was listed as an issue, Indigenous relations, transportation, networking, collaboration, and then on the opportunity side, quite a bit on different sectors of the economy: sports, hotels, marine tech, film, value added. So some really good, as I said before, some really good insights out of the focus groups. Those focus groups, I think we had about 8 focus groups. So we had a manufacturing focus group. We had a sort of an industrial and agriculture tourism one. So we really got some good information and feedback through those focus groups. So the business survey I mentioned was quite successful. We've done a lot of business surveys in the past on these types of projects, and we're quite happy with the amount of responses we get. Typically, economic development doesn't really resonate with the community, but again, we got some great feedback. So here is just some of the disadvantages that were brought up in the business survey. And again, these issues have been repeated in the focus groups and in the interviews. So living costs, housing affordability, labor shortages, et cetera, down the rows there. So again, the business survey sort of echoed what we heard in the interviews and the focus groups. And these are just some of the opportunity areas. So housing, transportation, economic development, business support, I guess you could say, Indigenous opportunities, reconciliation, and also senior economy and services. In the business survey, we also asked, like we did with the directors, we asked what should the EDC role be? So these are the 5 sort of highlights out of that. Collaboration, obviously, community engagement, sort of being the voice for economic development, if you will, being out there and representing the economy and that balanced economy that we were talking about earlier. Infrastructure and urban development. So there's going to be a lot of growth pressures coming down the pike here for the Cowichan region, and whether it's in whether it's in the downtown areas or whether it's in the urban areas, we've got issues in terms of where the economy is going to grow and where those businesses are going to be located. Economic diversification, of course, education and skills development, and also destination development. Just a couple of slides on the community survey. So we did the community survey and the business survey. Very similar, again, to the business survey: cost of living, access to housing, property taxes, etc. down the line here. So, and we also in the community survey asked about opportunities. So where is it that we should be, focusing our efforts? And again, very similar to the business survey: skilled workers, transportation, affordable housing, seniors economy. So we'll be taking this information and sort of incorporating it into the economic development planning as we go into the workshop and then start pulling together the framework for the strategy, and then of course the delivery of the final product later on in the year. So that's a bit on what we heard. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Excellent, thank you. And just identifying that it's Lionsgate Consulting that you are with?
Yes, I'm sorry
for the
not-
board's,
yeah.
just for the board's
Yeah.
information. I have Director Stone. Anyone else while I'm here? Wilson, Justice?
Yeah, thanks for the update and the presentation, Stephen, and for our conversation earlier in the process. This is interesting observation that so many of our conversations are merging toward the same themes, concerns, and challenges, whether it's water, social challenges, affordability, how it affects business, land use planning, and maybe that's a good sign for sort of breaking down the silos that we have between organizations. I think that a few years ago at ICE-T, we had the conversation about why we don't talk about housing and other sustainability concerns when looking at economic development projects. And since that time, we've come to adopt a new way of looking at economic development through a well-being framework that looks at social, environmental, and economic impacts in totality when judging the value of economic development. And you can see how it's impacting businesses and economic development prospects in the Cowichan Valley as well. So just wanted to say thank you for the work. There's still more work to be done, but appreciate the update and for all the work to date. And also that, although we are Cowichan-centric at Economic Development Cowichan and talking to people to the south and the north and really across the island and coastal region, these are similar themes and challenges, but also similar opportunities. And I think it might be an opportunity for us as an economic development organization, as a regional government, to start looking at how we spread our connections and cooperation out even further. When we're looking at the ocean sector, blue economy, you see what's happening with the Center for Ocean Applied Sustainable Technologies to the south, and they're looking to Nanaimo now potentially as an opportunity as well. That if we want to get in on some of these larger, more forward-looking economic development initiatives, there may be opportunities for collaboration with partners outside of our region to help benefit us all on Vancouver Island. So just want to say thanks and look forward to the next steps. Appreciate it. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. I have Director Wilson next.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Steve. Hello, Barry. Two queries here. What do we mean by business support? And what do we mean by education and skills development? Can you expand on those two, please?
Well, the business support, that, out of the business survey, of course. So business support would be things like better access to capital, better access to local supply chains, anything that's going to increase the competitiveness of local businesses, especially when you get to SMEs or small and medium-sized businesses in this country anyways, and certainly within, BC and on Vancouver Island. A lot of the economic development potential is actually not by bringing new businesses in from the outside. It's creating investment from within the existing business community. And in order for that to be effective, you have to work with companies entrepreneurs and, even the mom and pops to get them the assistance that they need to make the investment or continue to make the investment in expanding their businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So business support can be right across the board, from marketing to finances to funding, and including labor, access to labor, which was a key issue in both the community and the business survey. The labor market, education and skills development is I call it labor market. It's a labor market issue. We have, we have sort of an odd situation in the BC economy where we still have sort of elevated unemployment, but we also have job vacancies, a lot of job vacancies. A lot of employers can't source the labor that they need, yet we have an unemployment issue. So that means there's some inefficiency in the market, if you will. And from an economic development perspective, the question is how can we be involved in sort of being part of the solution for that, whether it's working through the local universities, working with the federal government, the provincial government, on sort of those labor market issues that are going to help our employers so that they can invest and grow the economy. So I hope that answers those two questions.
Thank you. Moving on, Director Justice, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a comment for Mr. O'Riordan, as I was reading it, I sort of came to the conclusion that the report and the analysis might benefit from a little bit more thought and precision with respect to the use of the terms growth, development, and sustainability. And as you've pointed out yourself in the past, in economic development, those terms have very specific meanings that aren't necessarily the same in ordinary conversation. And as I understand it, economic development refers to improving quality of life more generally, and sustainable economic development refers to doing so in a way that doesn't damage the environment, that doesn't damage the future generations' prospects of doing the same, and in terms of creating less, not more social inequity. However, in the reports, it's not always clear when the words development and growth are used, whether those are referring to those precise economic definitions, or whether they're being used more generally in the sense of implying increasing population, expanding communities, construction, land conversion, and so on. So I think there's a bit of a potential for a disconnect and misinterpretation in the use of those terms. And I would add that as I read through the report, it became obvious to me that much of the feedback that we're receiving does seem to assume that that sort of growth is in fact absolutely necessary for having a strong economy. And in fact, I think that that's so internalized for some people that they just substitute growth for what we mean by economic development. So I think you would agree, and I think most of us would agree, that the real goal is prosperity, whether or not we grow, and that our sustainability goal is to build a stronger and more resilient regional economy, acknowledging the fact that perpetual expansion is impossible, and recognizing the issues we've got around climate change and water sustainability and biodiversity loss and so on. So anyway, just to go back to the report, I think clarity in the use of those terms and disambiguation between economic development and development economic growth and using sustainability in a sort of precise and consistent way would be very useful.
Through the chair, thank you for the comment and observation. Just pointing out, this is a draft report, so we will be revising it as things go along, but we're going to take that into account as we revise. In general, I think you're right that the general perception up to recent years has been growth for growth's sake, and that's not what we're looking for through economic development in this region. From my perspective, we are agnostic to growth, and we're looking more at how do we create a regenerative economic system within the constraints. With that, there is projected growth in number of people moving to the region. So we are going to have growth in some areas, and growth within any system, let's say a natural system, can take place, can still take place without overburdening that system if it's done the right way. So that just leave my comment there. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Director Morrison.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Barry, and I appreciated the opportunity to sit with Director Deck and have the interview. And I just, a couple of comments, and I will get to the question. And I'm concerned because we've got an overriding issue here, and that's the housing issue. And, you know, I think the real estate and the mantra that most realtors go by, and that's location, location, location. You know, in the case of our challenges, I think the word is housing, housing, housing. And you know, when you consider the employment deficit, the job listings just with Island Hill, and the skill shortage that they see with the you know, the upcoming opening of the new hospital. Everything seems to be linked in that people in the service sector working two jobs in a lower pay scale are having difficulty affording housing. So I note what the responses have been so far. I know that in my business of finances and investing, we talk about food, transportation, and shelter as being core investment areas for safety of money, but I look at the fact that we really have that shelter issue and it touches everything. It touches our homelessness issue, the ability to fill not just regular type jobs and middle income jobs, but even people garnering high wages are having difficulty finding a place to live. So what I'm hoping for, and it looks like you've got some feedback so far, is a proactive set of actions that as local government we can take to start to alleviate this housing crisis that we have. I know that in local government there wasn't that many years ago where we were downzoning light industrial and industrial land because we thought it was a better use for residential. Now we have had to do industrial land inventories because we have none. So two things, I'd like to see proactive steps that we can take as local government to help to ease the housing crisis and increase demand, and just make sure that in what we're doing on a day-to-day basis that we're not doing anything to exacerbate some of the issues that we're facing. And I just used that when we were downzoning light industrial and industrial land. Now it looks like it was a really silly thing to do, but hindsight is always 20/20. So I'll leave it with that. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Ishdash.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. The first one extremely quick, if I can just get that one out of the way. How did you determine the location of the survey respondents? Just because the only reason I bring it up is if we went by address or postal code, sometimes that isn't representative to where actually people live.
Yeah, I don't have the details on that because other members of the team are handling the survey. On the business survey, I can tell you that North Cowichan was not included because they were going through their own process and their own survey. So there is some, however, we do have access to the survey that they undertook. So on the business side, I'd have to dig into the data and get back to you with, where those responses have come from. And the same thing on the community survey. I couldn't tell you. We do have the breakdown in the What We Heard report on where I don't have them in front of me, but we do have the breakdown. I think it's fairly representative of the region. But
I can respond there. Location was one of the questions of the survey. We recognize that a lot of people identify Duncan as their location very often within this region, when in fact they're based outside of Duncan, most notably in North Cowichan. So we acknowledge that natural bias in respondents to such a question.
Okay, thank you. So that, Mr. Chair, that response also partially helped what my actual question was going to be, in being that in understanding that North Cowichan's taking on its own work on this topic, that probably leads to why there isn't much talk on natural resource manufacturing, extraction, and to that manner is such that under innovation and manufacturing, we've seen the provincial government provide significant investment to both companies like Canadian Bavarian and Ron Anderson's and Sons Limited Modular Manufacturing into the sums of millions of dollars, which is I think what they're doing is a value added, but also a more mindfully, locally focused use of the forest industry that's here. I think through all the official community plans and this board as well, we all embrace the forest industry, but we want it done in a different way in the future that's reflective of the environment, and most notably, especially in this area, the 3 impacted watersheds. But with that, I think how we can do is we want to do more with less, and then also with your good work, Mr. Reardon, the circular economy lens through it. I just didn't see circular economy and value added really reflected a whole lot in this, and possibly as because you didn't have respondents from North Cowichan as we look at curtailments at Catalyst and curtailments at the Chemainus Western Forest Products Mill. But we're seeing investment and expansion in the small mills such as Centurion, now supporting Ron Anderson's and Sons, and Canadian Bavarian, expanding and supplying homes across the world now. So just those being really growth areas, and what can the regional district to support those, and being that the provincial government's seeing that as a place of significant investment.
Through the chair, maybe I'll respond real quick. I think the language in the report is reflective of the comments we received from folks. And I think words such as circular economy are not still high in people's lexicon. And it's more language around sustainable development and opportunities in that way that are expressed. But it's very much in staff's awareness around the value and opportunity around circular economy. So we'll be certainly bringing that forward within our perspective in the creation of a final report. But maybe Steve has something to add on the value added wood, because we didn't receive a lot of comments on that within the responses, which was interesting in noting its absence.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that, Barry, other than we did, in the focus groups, we did get more specific than the feedback we got in the surveys. So in the focus groups, we did dive into some of those issues, especially when we were talking about technology and how it relates to the circular economy, clean tech, that sort of stuff that's there is action, there is activity in the Cowichan region on those, and most people are not aware of it. So it's part of the hidden economy, if you will, but we'll certainly be talking about that when we get into the actual development of the strategy.
Thank you. Alternate Director Tatham.
Thank you for that. And in these reports, and being a lifelong salesman, it's always a recommendation that there is better communication and outreach. And it kind of concerns me because, it's often a recommendation, but the economy here is so diverse that how do you get the word out to so many disparate audiences? And so ultimately, it's just kind of a mouthing of a process rather than an actual strategy that's focused on specifics. So my question is, with this report, will there be some specific strategies that will be identified as opportunities, and that there will be the opportunity to measure the effect of doing appropriate promotion or sales approach in those categories?
The answer is yes. So there will be specific strategies, specific initiatives in terms of collaboration, networking, partnerships, not just with the business community, but with First Nations, of course. So yes, and to answer the second part of your question, there will be a performance measurement tool or model that's going to be included with the strategy. So yes, I mean, as with any strategic plan, we'll be setting our goals and objectives and attaching strategies to those and measuring them. How successful are we going to be or in the future? So yes, it's yes to both parts of your question.
Thank you. Moving on to Director Douglas, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll be brief with my comments. I'm going to offer a bit of a different perspective from one of my fellow directors with regards to housing being the focus of the economic development strategy. I realize it is referenced multiple times in the feedback, and I think we can all agree that is a priority for local government at this time in the Cowichan Valley Regional District, whether at this board or among our member municipalities. My concern, though, is having multiple jurisdictions and organizations all undertaking the same work and duplicating it among one another. So with housing, for example, at the municipal level, we've been assigned housing targets. We're in negotiations with the province to establish these numbers. It's a top priority for us at this time, not just because of the provincial direction, but I think would have been regardless with our council. And we are looking to increase our housing stock, in part by speeding up those development processing times, making sure the right infrastructure is in place, and also working closely with BC Housing on partnerships for non-market housing. At this level, at our board here, we do provide annual contribution to the Cowichan Housing Association, and when we went through that referendum process, established that we would be providing that ongoing funding, the idea was that they would be taking the lead on a lot of these housing solutions as well. And as many of you may recall, the Cowichan Housing Association did introduce a attainable housing strategy that is not, it's a number of years old, but it's still as relevant as it was when they introduced it. So with the housing crisis, I think that's going to be top of mind for all of us for a long time now, and should be. But I do worry that we're going to have the economic development strategy focus on an area that's already being dealt with by other jurisdictions, other organizations, including ones that we fund, and I would worry about duplicating some of that work and some of those recommended actions.
Thank you very much for that input. Director Nicholson?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you had much input from the farming community.
I believe in the business survey, we asked what sector was represented, and again, I don't have the details in front of me, but we did get feedback from the agriculture community. We also had an agriculture focus group, agriculture specific focus group. So we had a group around the table for that focus group. So yeah, there's been outreach. Again, we've got some good insights, and it will definitely be a focus area in the strategy.
Thank you very much. I have Director Ishdash to close, please.
Thank you, Chair. As follow-up, I didn't even really kind of think of the duplication that Director Douglas just spoke about. I think that's actually something really important maybe that the board wants to think about right now. And do we want to give direction, being that we're just at the initial stage here? Like, should we say focus on everything but the housing side? It is so important. It's just I want to make the most efficient use of your resources. I don't know if that's something we need to provide better clarification or direction on that, or is that something you kind of, I guess, would ask Mr. Reardon if that's something that you've already kept in mind, especially with the MRDT changes and all that money through the attainable housing. So just quickly on that, and I think that is a good closing point, Chair.
Through the chair, we do have a approved workforce housing strategy, which has gone back to also been sent to municipalities for additional feedback. So right now we would take that as a basis for a significant amount of engagement and direction on supporting housing, with the recommendations in there that some action is directed towards economic development couching within that, and others is recommending other bodies and organizations be involved in that area. So as given that, we would be taking that as our direction, unless Steve's got additional comments there. Thank you.
Anything there, Steve?
No, I think it's, with housing, it's always, the question from an economic development perspective is where can the organization be effective? Where can it bring some resources? Where can it leverage? And we'll be dealing with that. Barry mentioned the workforce housing strategy. So there's already strategic direction there, but definitely not sort of duplicating efforts, if you will, but finding out where the best intervention is, and given the skills and the resources of the organization. So it'll be in the strategic plan, but it will be very focused, specific, and hopefully, contribute to the anticipated outcomes in the workforce housing strategy.
And I just add that, where housing is present within the strategy, I would anticipate it'll be balanced with the needs of the rest of the economy and where we can be of most use.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Look forward to the final report and the subsequent discussion therein. Thank you very much both for your presentation. Yes.
Mr. Chair, do we also have a closed session before lunch?
We're
Thank you.
supposed to.
Just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. And moving on to R6, we have a person who has been patiently waiting in the gallery, Miss Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. It's R6, report from the Parks and Trails Division regarding CVRD Parks and Trails Visitation Summary from January to June 2024 for information.
So this is for information. If you do have any questions or comments, we made you sit through this for nothing. But thanks for joining us today, sir. And if there are any questions, if you want to reach out offline, please do so. Moving on, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. R7, report from the Finance Division regarding the Community Works Fund Agreement 2024-2023. And the recommendation is that it be recommended to the Board on July 24th, 2024, that the CVRD Board Chair and Corporate Officer be authorized to sign the 2024-2034 Canada Community Building Fund Agreement on behalf of the Cowichan Valley Regional District.
I believe Director Stone moved it. Alternate Director Champ seconds. Any questions or comments? Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Tracy. So, 5 years, comes to about 9.5 million. And how much of that annual amount, you know what I'm going to ask, don't you? How much of that annual amount will be allocated to individual area directors for discretionary use?
Through the chair to Director Wilson, staff will be coming back with a report in September, going over all of those options in that, at that time. But
Good
today,
stuff.
today is just to get us to sign off the agreement so that we can get our money.
Yeah, good. Just a heads up that I will be expecting lots of money.
And you can have that
Thank you.
discussion later. Thank you. Anything further? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Boyd.
Thank you. We're moving on to question period. Question period.
Question period. Wow, you got here just in time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm asking this question also on behalf of Cliff Evans, who I've been consulting with this morning on the way here. It's regarding the topic of water licensing, and particularly if there's a citizen hotline or something that the CRD would be willing to set up, because we've noticed, for example, in our neck of the woods, there's an artificial lake, and we are wondering, okay, that water use, how does that apply in today's climate and economy? So, the misuse of water. When we see huge uses of water in our communities, what do we do, Mr. Chair?
I think the best approach is to reach out to Walrus, Water Land Stewardship Resources, for their governance over this. I think that would be the appropriate approach.
All right. Thank you very much for that guidance.
And there is a great website there where you can get the contact information. And with that, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We'll move to closed session, that a motion to the meeting be closed to the public in accordance with the Community Charter, Part 4, Division 3, Section 90, subsections as noted in accordance with each agenda item. CSM 1, closed session of the minutes of July 10th, 2024. CSR 1, acquisition disposition of land, Section 91E. CSR 2, negotiations, Section 91K.
I see a plethora of hands moving and seconding. All in favor?